Answers? What answers? Asked the large bearded man. Hans struggled to find an explanation as he stared down the blade being held toward him. Come on then, out with it, yelled the man holding onto the blade. Sir, please, Lars answered from behind his little brother. We've come at the request of Queen Elsa and Queen Anna of Arendelle. The man pulled his head back a bit and looked Hans and his companions up and down. You don't look like any messengers that I ever saw. Hans took a deep breath before gaining the courage to speak. That's because we aren't messengers. The man took a step back and slowly lowered his sword away from Hans' face. What do you mean? Captain Arthur, I presume, Hans asked, breathing a sigh of relief. The man did his best to hide the small smile that the word captain put on his face. No one's called me that in a while, he responded. Call me Arthur. Now, what is your business here? Well, Captain Arthur, Hans said, I'm Hans, and I've come to ask you a few questions about something that happened over a decade ago. You mean you want to know what happened to the former King and Queen of Arendelle, Arthur assumed. Yes, responded Hans. But more importantly, Queens Anna and Elsa would like to know. You see, Captain, we've recently found a letter from Queen Iduna that named you as the ship captain who helped them on their dying voyage. It wasn't like that, Arthur began before being interrupted. My apologies. I didn't mean to sound like I was accusing you of a crime, Hans quickly interjected. The Queens just want to know everything that they can about that night, and you're the only person we can trust to give us any answers. Me? Arthur asked. The Queens trust me? I don't know about that, but their parents sure did. Otherwise, they wouldn't have asked for your help, Hans replied. Once again, Arthur cracked a tiny smile. He slowly made his way over to a small table in the corner of the room. The former ship captain sat down in an old wooden chair and looked over to Hans and his friends. I love the king and queen, he said as the group slowly approached him to listen to his telling of the story about what happened that fateful night all those years ago. King Agnarr was always honest with me anytime I did business with Arendelle. And Queen Iduna, oh, what a sweet soul. The gods mourned their loss, Arthur said solemnly. As did I. He continued as his head began to drop lower and lower. I'll tell you everything that I know from that charter. I remember it like it was yesterday when the king approached me. 'Twasn't every day the king visits the docks, you know. And he came walking right up to my ship and called me down to commission me and my men for an 8-week voyage. It was strange, though. The king said that he only had a few details he could share with me. But when a host as gracious as King Agnarr asks for anything, you do it, right? Arthur looked toward Hans and the group, who were all intently listening to his story. That's right, big man, Anders said with a soft nod to the ship captain. Well, that's what I did, Arthur continued with his story. We had 3 weeks to prepare for the voyage, so I got my crew to work. We made our way back to the dukedom and stocked up on rations for the voyage ahead. I thought that this would be a simple trip through the seas, but my opinion on the matter slowly began to change. I was preparing the ship to leave Wesselton when my mates brought a man who said he was a messenger from Arendelle. But something was off. Arthur shook his head back and forth. I shouldn't have listened to him. I shouldn't have, he continued to say frantically as he began to visibly shake. Hans took a step toward the ship captain and waved his hand to get his attention. Hey, it's all right, Captain Arthur, he said calmly. What did this messenger say to you? He said he had a box, a chest from the king and queen that they needed on board. He said that nobody could know about it, Arthur explained, now speaking directly to Hans. I told him to show me the chest, but I didn't recognize the seal. It wasn't the king or queen's, but he said, Arthur looked to the rest of the group. He said that it was the old Arendelle crest and that the chest was very important to Queen Iduna. So I took it. I let the men put it down below deck. After that, we were off to Arendelle. We ported there the following day, and the king and queen were kind enough to let us rest for the evening in town before heading out on our voyage. They do truly sound like hospitable people, Lars chimed in. Oh, they were, boy, Arthur continued. That's why I don't know why anyone would want to hurt them. Hurt them? Ingrid asked quickly. What do you mean, hurt them? I thought a storm brought the ship down that night. There was a storm, which didn't help the ship, but it was the men who took her down, Arthur responded. My men and I had been through rough waters like that before, and we always scraped through without a single casualty. But that night wasn't like any other. As the storm drenched the upper deck, I looked to my crew and I couldn't find them. Then I heard them calling out for me from the secondary. They were all abandoning ship. So where were King Agnarr and Queen Iduna? Asked Anders. I thought exactly, Arthur answered. I hollered to my men to not release the boat from the ship before I could get the king and queen. Then I went running for their cabin below deck, but as I made my way down below, I could hear the sound of banging. I thought they were in trouble, so I ran toward the sound, but as I went farther below deck, I could see that water was starting to seep through the floorboards. And just like that, the banging stopped. I looked around, and through the darkness, I could see the chest that had been stowed away onto the ship. Only this time it was open and empty. A few of my men came running around the corner, and they all stopped at the sight of me. I could see the sledgehammers in their hands. Silence fell over the room as everyone waited for Arthur to finish his story. Those no-good, dirty scoundrels, he yelled as tears began to form in the pits of his eyes. They sunk my boat. Arthur took in a deep breath. With those blasted hammers, they sunk her. So I sunk them. Hunter and Lars glanced at each other with terror in their eyes. I ran back up the stairs and sealed the door behind me. Crew like that deserve to go down with a ship they sink, Arthur said calmly. I tried to make it to the king and queen's chamber to get them out, but that was when another one of my men came running down. He tried to tell me that the royals had already gotten onto the safe boat, but I didn't believe him. Arthur shook his head. I shouldn't have turned my back. I walked past him toward the cabin, but as soon as my back was to the man, he struck me in the back of my head. Captain Arthur leaned back in his chair. Next thing I know, I'm waking up on our small secondary boat to calm seas. My ship was nowhere in sight, but even worse, King Agnarr and Queen Iduna never made it out of their chambers. My men swore to me they believed them to be safe, but I couldn't take their word for it. Not after what I saw. Ingrid and Anders looked at each other and back to the ship captain. What did you see? They asked in unison. Arthur paused for a moment and then took in a deep breath to calm himself before responding. A few weeks had passed, and I went to the Duke seeking a loan for a new ship. When I went into the castle, I saw 3 men, all in armor, with the same crest that was on the chest used to sink my ship. Arthur was now practically talking through his teeth as he clenched his jaw in anger at the thought of his ship being sunk. I never saw the Duke about getting me a new ship. That day, once I knew what I had been made a part of, I shut out the world. I didn't need the ugliness of it anymore. Wait, Laura said quietly. So you're saying that the Duke knows who the chest belonged to? Knows them? Arthur responded. I think that rat hired them. Hans looked over his shoulder toward Ingrid and Anders. We need to get this information to the Queens right away. When are they due back at the ship? The ship? Asked Captain Arthur. The Queens are here? In Wesselton? Yes, they came with us, Ingrid replied. The ship captain's eyes widened. No. They can't be here. Arthur stood from his seat. You need to get the Queens away from the Duke right now. What? Why? Hans began to ask before he was interrupted by Arthur, who was now gesturing for the group to leave his house. They're not safe here, he said as he ushered them toward the door. Arthur was clearly beginning to panic. You need to save them from him, quickly. The group could see that the ship captain was serious and swiftly began to make their way out of the house. As they stepped outside, Anders quickly called back to Arthur. We have a ship at the docks, big man. Come find us if you still have a longing for adventure. The commander would like you, he said enthusiastically as he was practically pushed out of Arthur's home with the door slamming shut behind him. He sure was an interesting one, Anders said to the group. Yes, but what about the story he told? Ingrid responded. Do we believe him? I do, Hans nodded. The pain he felt in his heart was clearly real, he said as the group slowly started toward the alley that they had come out of earlier. How can you tell? Lars asked his brother. But before Hans could reply, chaos erupted around them as 4 men in normal clothing came at the group from all 4 sides. Each one of the bandits grabbed a different member of Hans' group, except for one. As Hans realized what was happening, he turned to face one of the attackers heading right toward him. Hans prepared himself as he noticed the shimmering of light bouncing off of a small dagger the bandit held. Hans' eyes widened as the man thrust the blade forward in a stabbing motion.